Makadimo semure Zimbabwe kusangana zvekare pano pachivhitivhiti. Tiri kutambira mashoko ekuti kuri kunzi kwakabuda ED achienda kuDubai uko kunonzi WTO forum. Zviri kunzi haana kutomboshedzwa ikoko. Zviri kunzi pari kutariswa pawebsite kuti vaoneke kuti shuwa here ED aripo palist revanhu vakashedzwa ikoko. Zviri kunzi zviri kutoshayikwa. Saka muri Zimbabwe inyaya yatishoka iyoyo, inyaya yativhundutsa. Zvakadaro toda kuti tikupei kuri kubva nyaya kuti munyatsoziva kuti zviri kuitika, because comrade vari panapa vakatotsamwa. Zviri kunzi the ED's trip to the Dubai WTO forum is clearly not diplomatic, as he is not publicly recognized as an attending head of state on their websites, etc. Unlike the Botswana President Boko, who is on an official state visit, ED made the trip alone with Paul Mavima appearing in a edited video to create a false impression of legitimacy. The airport convoy resembled Wikinews escorts in South Africa. Zimbabwe as a state is abandoned, and Chiwenga is trying to patch the government together while keeping the country steady in these trying times. Zimbabwe will not die. Zimbabwe will not collapse. Ndofunga mazinzwira mega nyaya tiri kutaura panapa haisi nyaya yekuti tanhonga kana kuti chii. Ndo zvacho zviri kuitika izvozvizvi. Ndo vanhu vari kutipa information. Macomrades vari kuuya neinformation yese yakazara. Any move raitwa rekunyepa, aiwa riri kubva rangobudiswa ipapo isu tobva toita se tobva takupai. Saka isusu tine vana vari kunze kwenyika vatinenge tinavo panapa vatinozokupai kuti munzwe zvimwe zvavanenge vachipa nemacontributions avanenge vachitipa. Saka isusu tinokutendera henyu kuti murambe muchititeerera nekuti tisu tinenge tichiuya ne.com rinenge richipisa, tisu tinenge tine yese pano pachivhitivhiti chenyu.
Let's say it was net one. The moment that it entered, the fund, it had to be measured using, that standard. But when we are looking at the audit and what has come out of the audit, there's evidence that that right there was violated. The assets, as they entered, they were never given a fair value. They were never given fair value. What am I talking about? This is what I'm talking about. When you receive an asset, you write down its value on day one. On the first day, asset yauya, net one yauya, zesa yauya. What is the value of that asset on day one? Nothing of that sort exists with Mutapa. And yet we are being told that the Mutapa is holding $16 billion worth of assets. These were transferred into the fund, and there is no recognition of the initial value or the baseline value at the moment of the transfer, or at the moment when the transfer was made. And on that first day, you don't even know this, the baseline value of that house. You don't even know how much it is worth. And in the absence of that knowledge, how can you go on and claim Kutizo Imbai again a value? How much in value has it gained? Or if it is, lost some value, how much in value, how much have you lost in value if you do not know the baseline? So without a baseline, ladies and gentlemen, there is no starting point. So this is why the auditors are being said to have said, Kuti, this is why the auditors are reporting that the Mutapa violated the IFRS 9. Because without a baseline performance like the one that we got told It's just a story, not a measurement. And when something becomes just a story, where does that leave us as citizens? We are lost in terms of knowing the truth, or in terms of knowing what exactly is happening. So that is one violation that was made. And then there's another violation, the fair value measurement. The International Financial Reporting Standard 13 that speaks of the fair value measurement. And this is a standard that defines how fair value must be determined, requiring market-based, independently viable valuation methods to be used. But by Mutapa using unaudited data, hypothetical assumptions, and unverifiable valuation models, they failed to meet that requirement. So in some way, we are talking about them just doing guesswork, because the IFRS 13, it governs how you measure fair value. So it demands that there should be market evidence. There should be an independent valuation. You're going to see how this independent valuation was violated in one of the assets. There should be transparency in terms of all the assumptions that are made. And the numbers must be verifiable. You can't be banding about numbers that cannot be verified. And Mutapa did not do this. So instead, they relied on unaudited financial information, hypothetical assumptions, models that change widely depending on the inputs that you are dealing with. And the evaluations or the valuations that were made, Grant and Thornton said, no, we can't confirm this. So this is why in their reporting, they added an emphasis of matter, which is a serious warning that they were essentially telling us that the evaluations that were made could change dramatically if the assumption changes. And that is where corruption, becomes, that is where corruption, comes in. And you wonder with that, guesswork, what reporting was even made to Emerson Mnangagwa? How did they even convince him to go with this? So what they did was to just come up, with numbers. They're looking solid, on paper, but it's just like building a building, on sand. Where there's guesswork, there's no accountability. It becomes, impossible. And then the last one that was violated is the IAS 21, International Accounting Standard 21. So this one governs how financial information must be translated between currencies, including things like inflation adjustments and consistent exchange rate application. And this again was violated because when they did the translating from ZIG to the US dollar, there was no inflation, restatement, and that right there helped in creating distorted, values. What am I talking about? So before you convert, the ZIG to the US dollar, you must adjust for inflation. That is the norm. You must use appropriate exchange rates. That is the norm. You must ensure that converted numbers are reflective of the reality on the ground in terms of what is happening in the economy. Mutapa did not do that. You'd get that. You'd get some some values for some companies coming from historical ZIG numbers being translated directly into US dollar without the inflation being adjusted. So the danger of that is, one may ask, there's going to be an overstating of the value. There's going to be an understating of the value. There's going to be a lot of distortion. There's going to be a lot of misleading. Just just imagine when 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 those conversions were done of the bond notes in 2018 into the US dollar, or when we take the historical value of the bond notes in 2018 and it translated into US dollars in today's exchange rate without adjusting for the inflation, what do you think is going to be happening? You're not doing any accounting. Wana champion, wana kuza, that is not accounting. Mruja feja feja. You are just performing some magic, right there. And feja feja has got no place in the sovereign wealth fund. So those were the three violations that I have researched and found that were made. So let us look now at these numbers. So we're talking about unverifiable valuations. I'm talking about the numbers that are there that the auditor could not defend. So when an auditor says that numbers or the evaluation that has been done is unverifiable, they simply mean that the numbers used to calculate the value of an asset cannot be confirmed. They can't confirm that. So let us look at the Mutapa. We've got the figures that are raised by in that post that have been put there by Ace. I'm quite sure he got it from the from that audit. There's 11.4 billion worth of assets. These were valued using an audited financial information. So that left the auditor with no sufficient appropriating audit evidence to speak to or to support the value. So they could not even confirm whether kuti izo numbers ari accurate here, aka-inflatwa here, aka-manipulatwa here. They couldn't even do that. Avanokwanisa kana kutomboita determine kuti izo ma-adjustments acho aidiwa kuti aitwe ndeapi. How large were they? How small were they? There was no transparency, at all. So if evaluation cannot be verified, then what are we supposed to be doing, us as the citizens of Zimbabwe? What are we supposed to be doing, us as the public? Can we trust that? Can we trust the reported value because it is representative of the national asset? If we don't, if you as a citizen, if you and me, we don't really know how much something is worth, it doesn't, it translates to you not knowing what is it exactly, that you're owning.